ladies and gentlemen, we are just so honored to have this audience. We love bringing you the people who are making news, the people who have made news, and some people who are really the nexus, the genius nexus of how the decisions get made inside of these orbits. You know, behind these politicians who walk out and who stand and who bang the gavel and pound the podiums, there needs to be people with actual intellect and high IQs. I've hung around a lot of politicians. They're not very high IQ. There needs to be people who are actually designing policy. There needs to be the masterminds of various movements and various levels of politique. And it is why we are particularly honored to welcome our next guest onto the show, somebody who we've been looking forward to talking to for a long time. I would argue the brain trust of the most successful Donald Trump policies that were executed and were implemented. A man whose vision for the country, were it to have been properly crystallized and were to have gone forward into full execution, we would be living in a very, very different country right now. A man who I think is in charge of one of the most successful organizations in America at this current moment, America First Legal, a true fighter. Stephen Miller joins the program now. Stephen, thank you so much.
It's a great introduction. I need to take you on the road with me. You can just do all my introductions. It would probably do wonders for my fundraising.
I got you, boy. Listen, I've been in DC long enough to understand that there needs to be a high level of IQ, planning, strategy, and logistics behind the bluster, right? And behind the people going out and making the speeches. And you were that for the entirety of Trump's first term, and you remain that now today with very, very successful America First Legal. You have a great legal mind, and you have a great mind for how government functions. As you read through Jack Smith and what happened yesterday to your old boss, what's your major takeaway?
Well, first, let me say I've been lucky enough over the years to help a number of different politicians and work for a number of different congressional committees. And basically, I've been in Washington inside either Congress or the executive branch every day since I graduated from Duke University. But I never in all that time met a politician more brilliant than Donald Trump, the man who is now being persecuted, not prosecuted, but persecuted to a degree and at a level that we have never seen before in the history of this country. If you read the indictment, and so much has been said and so much has been written on the subject, and you even have principled people on the left, like, for example, Jonathan Turley and Glenn Greenwald, who have been so erudite on this. But the indictment is the effort to imprison somebody for expressing and having thoughts that the Department of Justice considers to be unacceptable. I think it was Turley who said this is American history's first ever true prosecution of disinformation. And so, in effect, they're seeking a life prison sentence for what the state regards as disinformation. And so I want everyone just to kind of open their eyes a little bit here. Let's just zoom out for a second. Nothing ever happens in isolation or by accident. It's all connected, right? So if you think about suddenly in our lexicon, you see the term disinformation and misinformation and also malinformation ever present. And you see other words being grouped with those words like domestic terrorism and hate speech, right? What they're trying to do is to get around the left's number one problem in establishing complete control over our society has been the First Amendment, right? They've run shot through a lot of rights and a lot of freedoms, but this is the key point. While leftist judges and jurists have been pretty happy to dispense with most of the Constitution, the last shred that's still been, I mean, you talk about like something like the Commerce Clause, it's been gone for like 100 years, right? The last thing that's still standing has been the First Amendment, where even historically more liberal jurists, more liberal justices, and more liberal prosecutors have said that's a line we're not going to cross, criminalizing speech. And so really starting in earnest during the pandemic, they created this architecture, this lexicon to say, well, speech is violence and hate speech is a crime. And really, these are actually the words of domestic terrorism. And so now we're living in an era, and again, and Donald Trump is is not only the test case for this, but because it's the most spectacular application imaginable, everything else for the state becomes very easy after that, right? In other words, if you can imprison the chief rival to the president of the United States, the current president, Joe Biden, on a free speech violation, then truly its applications are limitless in all circumstances and all places. So we have now crossed that threshold into, if you are guilty of misinformation and disinformation, that you can and will go to jail. And what's interesting is if you look at a lot of countries that we would think of as being more despotic, or countries that would be more authoritarian, typically when they're charging an innocent person, they at least have the dignity and good sense to frame them with something that would transparently be a crime, like say, oh, you're spying on behalf of a foreign country, so you go to jail. They say, well, I'm not spying, I'm just an American tourist. So they say, no, you're spying, you're going to jail. The American population has been so desensitized to the disinformation police that the state doesn't even blush at the idea of saying, you said something that we think is untrue, and so now you're going to jail. You said there's election fraud, but we say there isn't. Don't ask us to produce evidence that there isn't. You think that the Department of Justice, before they issued this indictment, went down to Georgia and did signature matching? You think they went and checked the ballots in Philadelphia? You think they matched up the names of the voters to the actual addresses and said, are they a criminal? Are they a citizen? Did they live here? When were they born? Were they 18 when they voted? Are they domiciled here? Do they have a criminal record? Is this even their signature? You think they did one bit of that work before just saying, oh, no, it's the most secure election in history and you're going to jail? So let's not understate. That's the danger. Understate the peril and gravity of this moment. If they can jail for life the leader of the opposition because he committed a conspiracy to say a thing that was untrue and to try to make the public case for that thing, again, untrue in the words and mind of the deep state, then what person's liberties could possibly be safe? You could be, for example, a citizen organizing parents on, say, opposition to gender studies in the curriculum, the LGBTQIA plus trans agenda. And if you organize a bunch of parents and you express a bunch of views, but then let's say somebody says, but you have caused emotional pain and suffering to trans children, right? So you're not just guilty of free speech. You're now guilty of depriving this person of their civil rights. This is a conspiracy to deprive someone of their civil rights under the statutes they're using in this case, which were passed after the Civil War, right? These are statutes, and the civil rights statutes passed after the Civil War to stop the KKK. They're going to say, no, you've violated the civil rights of trans children, and you and all your domestic terrorist parents are all going to jail because your claims are untrue. How do you know? Well, we asked the American Association of Pediatricians, and they said it's untrue. So you're going to jail. The applications here are limitless.
Do you have any faith, and we try as hard not to black pill on this show, we try and white pill, at the very least red pill people, do you have any faith that our Supreme Court will crush this in due time? We've had a couple of experts on saying that this would be a very open and shut case. Your legal take?
Yeah, so I always want to caution people against undue optimism, because when you live in a place of excessive optimism, it tends to dull your motivation. It tends to sap you into a state of complacency. It tends to lead you not to do the work that needs to get done. And so the case is open and shut, right? This would be a 9-0 rejection in almost any other political circumstance. But again, I want to zoom out for a second and point out what's been happening here. They've been running a psyop on the judiciary now related to all things January 6th for almost 3 years. And so if you look at what they've been ruling in a lot of cases, I'm not just referring, by the way, just to the criminal cases. I'm also referring to a lot of the civil cases with the complete destruction of executive privilege and various other long-standing executive branch privileges that have all been eradicated as applies to this case. And the judiciary has been both conditioned and in some cases bullied into bending or breaking or ignoring or violating the law to be on what is considered to be the right side of whatever the case is, and to therefore not be seen as being in the words of the left, as an illegitimate judge. So in other words, they've been working the judiciary just like they worked John Roberts ahead of the Obamacare ruling, but multiply this times like a million, right? They've been working the judiciary to say, you are not legitimate if you rule this case based on the laws and the facts. This has to be outcome driven. Whoever we in the media say needs to be punished or go to jail or be harassed or be invaded, you have to reach that conclusion. And so, and you look at the same dynamic happening, of course, right now in Trump's criminal cases, where you see the judge in Florida, who, by all accounts, is a mainstream, centrist, down the middle judge with absolutely no agenda whatsoever, who has been harassed, intimidated, relentlessly vilified and bullied by the media. And then in the DC case, here's a judge who, by all accounts, has shown an extraordinary degree of bias in her rulings over a long period of time, who's now being lionized and treated as a heroic figure. And so the message is clear. Rule the way we want you to, and you will be a hero. Rule the wrong way, and you will be demonized for life. And so again, while the legal issues here is clear cut, this is a 9-0 rejection in any other circumstance. We do have to be worried that this psychological intimidation campaign. Remember, the Department of Justice for years now has declined to apply federal law to clear the demonstrators from the justices' homes and property. Right? This is the same justice that even faced with the assassination attempt on one of the justices has declined to enforce longstanding federal law to clear demonstrators away from their homes. So that, again, this has been an intimidation campaign that's long running, and we should not just sit back and say, don't worry, the Supreme Court is going to handle this. We need to ultimately understand that we have to organize to elect at every level of government, from top to bottom, individuals who are going to be resolute in restoring justice to this land.
How do you do it from an administration standpoint? You, of course, are possibly the number one person to ask this question to. In a Trump term 2.0, how do you properly take the machete to this just absolutely... You've lost the American people here. I mean, you've lost Joe Rogan. Joe Rogan just dropped an entire 2-hour podcast where he just went full flamethrower against Joe Biden. I've never seen anything like it. If you're losing Joe Rogan and you're losing these people, centrists, as you just talked about, the centrist judge, Elon Musk's of the world, if you're losing these individuals, man, people are ready for actual change. I think the atmosphere, perhaps, Stephen, is right for true reform here at the DOJ. Sir, how do you go about doing it?
Well, the first and most important thing is to reestablish what is known as the Unitary executive. So this goes back to the Watergate era. And now we obviously know, looking back on it now, of course, that was a deep state coup against Richard Nixon. But this goes back to the Watergate era, in which, and by the way, the cost of that, just so we're talking about measuring this in human lives, is that, I know this is a tangent, but just to understand the consequence of the deep state thinking they run policy. Getting rid of Nixon, who was pursuing an honorable peace and a durable peace in Vietnam, led to the complete collapse of Nixon's Vietnam strategy after he left office that would have then kept some sort of peace in Indochina, and instead we were left with communist butchery on a scale that few can imagine. I'm not talking about the validity of entering the war. I'm just pointing out that when you get rid of duly elected presidents, the effects on policy can be truly calamitous. But they pushed this idea after Nixon that the Department of Justice was an independent branch of government. And I mean, how many times in the Trump era did you hear this idea that the DOJ is independent? Could you imagine what our founding fathers, any of them, Washington, Madison, Jefferson, would have said if you told them that the Department of Justice, that the law enforcement, the prosecutorial power was going to be put into an independent agency that was self-piloting, that was self-guiding, and that's going to make its own decisions without any influence from the executive branch. But that's the idea that's been pushed now for decades and decades. If you read Article 2, right, the first sentence says that the executive power is vested, right, in a president, not 10 people or 20 people or 50 people or 2 million people, right? A president. This is an important point. You have been conditioned as citizens to think that there's something autocratic about saying that all executive power should be in the hands of a single president. You've been conditioned to think, no, that's not good, right? It should be diffused into the hands of lots of people. The most democratic position possible, and the only correct constitutional position, is that the president alone wields the executive power, and everyone in the executive branch serves at his pleasure and his discretion, because the president is the only one elected by the whole American people. Nobody unelected in the executive branch has any independent power. It is a power delegated by the president to them. So the first and most important step is to reestablish, again, this principle of the unitary government, and to say that the Department of Justice and the execution of our laws is the most important, not just but the most important presidential responsibility. And that everyone in that department constitutionally, that in other words, that civil service reform laws themselves are unconstitutional. It is unconstitutional to say the American people can elect a president, but they can be forced to have a mid-level Department of Justice, far left radical, making decisions independent of that president that cannot be removed by that president. That you as a citizen do not have the ability to elect somebody to change how the Department of Justice operates. It is an unconstitutional premise. So you begin by challenging that very notion. And then underneath that, right, you have to appoint people at every single level. So it's not just, people get very focused on, it's obviously essential, on who the Attorney General, the Deputy Attorney General is, and on down the chain, Associate Attorney Generals and so forth. Who's the head of the National Security Division, the head of the Criminal Division. These are all essential appointments. But you need to be thinking about who's the head of the field office, who's the chief attorney in that field office, who are the chief attorneys in every single agency and sub-agency throughout, who's that attorney's chief of staff, who's that chief of staff deputy chief of staff, right? You would be thinking about all of the appointed positions throughout the department and making sure that every single one of those people is both mission aligned, but also possesses the skill set, the focus, the knowledge to be able to outmaneuver the deep state instead of being outmaneuvered by them. The deep state has a set of tools, and we know what they are. And the one thing that we know is that the moment that you start pushing at them, they're going to follow that same playbook, right? Which is they're going to manufacture a story, they're going to leak it, then they're going to investigate it, and then they're going to assert that a crime has been committed. So you need to appoint people who are sophisticated enough to be able to understand how to operate in an environment in which that's the playbook being used against you. And then you combine that with the power of the intelligence community to actually engage in illicit espionage and illicit spying. So it's not going to be enough just to appoint people where, maybe you follow them online, you follow them on social media, and you think, oh man, this person really gets it. That's not enough. It's not enough just to get it. Getting it is great. But you also have to be able to operate in an environment where people who spent 10, 15, 20, 25, 30 years learning nothing else but how to run these ops. You need to appoint people who are sophisticated enough to not only see the ops, but to be able to outmaneuver the operators. And then you need to pursue criminal prosecutions of those who have unlawfully used state power to advance their ends and their aims. And understand that until there is criminal culpability. So take, for example, the Russia hoax. Under the precedent that they have established, which in this case is true, unlike in the case of President Trump, where it's all lies all the way down, they perpetrated a conspiracy to defraud the United States government. The Russia hoax was a conspiracy to defraud the government.
Yes.
Right? That is therefore a criminally prosecutable event. And then the conspiracy as well to defraud the government about the Hunter Biden laptop and to defraud the American people. Also, it violates all those same statutes, right? Interfering in elections, civil rights, and conspiracy. So you need to then begin establishing this template. What they have used on their mountain of lies, you must now use those same precedents and those same tools, except you are building a case on a Mount Everest of truth. So same tools. The difference, this is the key point, The difference between us and them is that we will use those tools to pursue true and actual justice against true and actual wrongdoers, whereas they've used those tools to pursue injustice against the innocent. That's the key moral distinction. The mistake that people on the right make is thinking, oh, well, no, we can't use these precedents because then we're like them. That is like saying that a cop and a criminal are the same person if they both use force. They are not the same person. One is pursuing justice and one is pursuing crime. Use the same legal tools they've established, but use them to bring the truly guilty to justice.
Ladies and gentlemen, can you see why Stephen was such an effective speechwriter for President Trump? Can you see why some of the best lofty prose that Donald Trump spaketh while he was president came from Stephen? My final question for you is just a simple follow-up to what you just said. Are you in favor of state AGs going after and filing charges against Democrats? Do you believe that Hillary Clinton and the people who signed the letter to say that Hunter Biden's laptop was disinformation, do you believe that Republicans turnabout is fair play? And as soon as Republicans gain the executive power again, that they should immediately launch investigations into Russiagate, true investigations?
Without question. And so, again, they've established the rules. They've established the rule that if you engage, again, in what they say is a conspiracy, what you and I would say is speaking the truth, if you engage in a conspiracy that has any impact, again, in their view on an election or an electoral outcome, that's a crime. That's what they're saying. That is the template that they have established. So we are saying that the people who actually lied, who actually engaged in a conspiracy, who actually engaged in premeditated, willful, and malicious conduct to deceive and lie to the American people should be held to account absolutely without question. I'll make one more point on this, which is that there may be those, I probably would say I'm one of those people, who would rather live in a world in which we don't ever have to have this conversation, right? In which there's nobody has to charge anybody on anything at all. But the only way you're going to ever get to that world, I mean, in the political realm, right? The only way you're ever going to get to that world is by creating compelling reason for those who are on offense to want to seek a legal ceasefire. In other words, if you are in any kind of existential struggle, and you are only getting pummeled, and you put up no defense, in what universe could you then go to the person who is pummeling you into the earth and say, could you please stop now? All that you will get is laughed at, mocked at, and then hauled away to the gulags, right? The only way you're going to get to an environment where you can say, all right, let's have a complete ceasefire, right? We're not going to, for example, the next guy in Missouri who defends his property from a mob, you're not going to prosecute him. The only way you're going to get to that point is if they have a reason to say, we're done with this. We're crying uncle. We did not start this. We have been on the receiving end of this for now in earnest for 7 years, although the roots of it are earlier. Again, but the key difference is that we will only go after those who are guilty, whereas they are going after those who are innocent. And the last thing I'll say is that if you look at the crime and the filth and the drugs and the gangs in this country, just think for just 1 minute. If the Department of Justice used even 1/100th of the resources they've used to go after Donald Trump, there would be no MS-13. There would be no Sinaloa cartel. There would be no foreign national gangs terrorizing our citizens. They could be removed like that. You could mobilize the National Guard, mobilize the FBI, go neighborhood by neighborhood, pick up every single known or suspected gang member who has no legal right to be here, and they could be flown out of the country. They are not using those resources to protect you, to protect your family, to protect your loved ones. They are using them to strengthen and establish their political control over the future of this country. And I can promise you this, if we don't elect in the very near future, from top to bottom, AGs, governors, president, Senate, House, people who understand what we're discussing here today, that no matter how right you feel, and no matter how much you know the truth and how wide awake you are, how open your eyes are, it's not going to matter, because their strength will dominate all day long over your rightness. That's the lesson of history. You can be as right as you want, But if one side is strong and one side is supine and passive, as are so many, of course, on our side in the Senate, they're just going to get pulverized. And so you need to elect people. And that's what we're talking about here. I'm talking about electing people from this mayors all the way to the top who understand what we discussed here today. So you can have allies on your side who get these fundamental truths and will act upon them.
Yeah. Amateur study strategy, right? Professional study logistics. These are logistics, and America First Legal is a logistics company. It is a company. It is a nonprofit. Sorry, correction. That is going forth and actually filing the legal charges that are changing our nation and are really taking offense to the left. Stephen, can you talk quickly about your group?
Yes, just very quickly. So America First Legal, we are a 501c3 nonpartisan nonprofit dedicated to the defense of our Constitution, our heritage, and the rule of law and our sovereignty in our court system. So we're filing one lawsuit after another. We are filing lawsuits against the Biden administration and against the radical left, and we are filing lawsuits against radical corporations and private organizations that are crushing your rights and crushing your liberties. We have won one major victory after another. We also represent parents in lawsuits against superintendents and school boards and school districts all across this country as well, too. We are the go-to place for people who are being crushed under the boot heel of this new authoritarianism. And every service that we provide to our clients is completely free to them because, again, we are a charitable foundation. So you want to find out more about what we're doing and how we are leading the way in restoring true law and justice in America, then visit aflegal.org. We're not interested in just studying these problems. We're interested in actually getting into the legal arena to fight them. aflegal.org.
Ladies and gentlemen, Stephen Miller, also on Twitter, or as it's known now, x.com. Look at that. Even China respects him. Even China cowers in fear and bows their head. Ladies and gentlemen, 500,000 people can't be wrong. Go follow Stephen Miller at Stephen M on x.com, twitter.com. Godspeed. You are doing some of the most important work in America, Stephen.
Thank you again. I really enjoyed it. Let's talk soon.